and welcome to the Peas and Quiet podcast. On this podcast, we discuss all things gardening, including growing veggies and flowers and how to create your dream backyard alongside nature. My name is Robin. I'm an environmental scientist turned full-time flower farmer and gardener, and I'll be your host for this podcast. On today's episode, I wanted to share an introduction to the podcast, and later in the episode, we chat all about what veggie seeds to sow and grow at the start of autumn. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters, and communities. We pay our respects to elders past and present and thank them for protecting our lands, coastlines, and ecosystems. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome to episode 1 of the Peas and Quiet podcast. You would have heard in that little introduction that my name is Robin, and I'm finally sitting down to record this podcast. It's been on my mind for quite a while, quite a few months actually, to sit down and start recording these episodes, but I'm doing it now. I'm sitting downstairs on the couch. I've got a peppermint tea and I'm looking out towards my garden, and I'm going to chat to you today about some of the seeds that I'm planting for autumn and the cooler months, but also just do a little bit of an introduction to this podcast and myself if you're new here, just to share a little bit about what we're going to be talking about on this podcast. So for those of you who don't know, I have a YouTube channel called The Nature Patch, and that's where I film a lot of garden videos and backyard business videos, sharing about how I am running a cut flower farm in my backyard. But I wanted to create a podcast where I could chat a little bit more in depth about different topics that might not be able to be included in like a 20-minute YouTube video, where I can kind of talk in depth a little bit more and just share a little bit more knowledge over here on this podcast. So I included like a little bit of an intro about what the podcast was going to be at the start of this episode, but to give a little bit more context, each week I will be discussing just different gardening topics that I want to cover a very broad variety of topics, because gardening is so varied and it's such a broad topic in itself. But I do want to talk about like how to grow and harvest your own food from your garden, how to start a backyard business, both my experience, and I would love to get guests on this show as well to share their experience, and also just share about the importance of gardening for both your mental and physical health, as well as for your community and environment around you. So I also wanted to chat about the name of this podcast, because I love a good pun. I love puns. I think they're hilarious. And Scott showed me this one quite a while ago. I think it was like over a year ago. And I instantly wanted it for the name of a podcast. So the Peas and Quiet podcast, there's peas in a pod, hence podcast, and also peace and quiet. I want this to be a space that is both hopefully like entertaining, but also just a relaxing space on the internet for us to just talk about gardening and plants and growing food and flowers and all of the amazing things that we can do with our backyards. So hence the Peas and Quiet. If you still don't get the pun, that's totally fine, but I love the name, and I also really love the little illustrations that are on our cover photo. So I commissioned some watercolor drawings from Lydia. I will put her Instagram handle on the screen, and I'll also include it in the show notes for this podcast. Her Instagram is called Flowers for Bear, one word. And I love her artwork, and she really brought my idea to life to have these cute little peas in a pod with some headphones and a microphone, and also just all of the things that I love about the garden, like harvesting food. She did a beautiful drawing of a like harvest basket, some lavender, a watering can, some garden tools. Yeah, I'm in love with the illustrations, and I love how Scott kind of put this image together for our cover photo. So I just wanted to do a quick shout out to Lydia to say thank you so much for the beautiful drawings for our cover photo, and also Scott, my partner, for helping me, or not helping me, he basically did the whole thing on Photoshop to put the whole thing together. So I'm very, very happy with that. But yes, that is a little background on the name. I love a good pun, so hence Peas and Quiet podcast. But as I was saying before, I really want to also just talk to people and hopefully one day have some guests on this podcast. I think the first few episodes, I'm just probably going to be chatting, like sharing my experience, talking about what I'm growing at the moment. I want to do some podcasts on just like how to prep your garden for the cooler months of the year. And I have a whole list of ideas that I would love to chat about and just, extend to my existing YouTube videos that I have, to have an audio version of this so that you can either listen to this, whether it's like on the way to or from work, or when you're in the garden, or if you're just relaxing on your Sunday, having a cup of tea, listening, however you want to listen. I just want this to be a way for you to either just relax and listen to someone talk about gardening, or hopefully to learn a little bit about how to grow food and flowers and just be inspired to grow, I suppose. I have personally always loved gardening ever since I was really young. I can remember being in the garden. I know my mum used to make me little fairy gardens, and I just always have memories of little magical spaces in the garden that I also do now, and create my own little magical spaces in my backyard. And I'm so glad that my childhood was filled with gardening and filled with plants and like working with worm farms. Even in primary school, I remember we had like a row of 10 worm farms that we would each take turns on feeding the worms, collecting the worm juice, selling it at school fetes and things like that. And I'm so thankful that I grew up just kind of normalizing growing your own food and being surrounded by nature, and waste management in terms of like making compost and being responsible for all of your food scraps and garden scraps and things like that, and making sure that that can turn into something that you can reuse in your garden. So I've always loved gardening and nature, and decided to pursue a Bachelor of Science when I did my undergrad. I actually did start out doing law and science. I dropped the law pretty quickly. I think it was about 2 semesters in when I found that wasn't for me. I originally thought I wanted to be an environmental lawyer, but that didn't work out. But I gradually, worked through my undergrad, got a Bachelor of Science, and then did my honours. Kind of got into the field of understanding the impact of mining on the environment, which was super interesting, and I loved my time doing that. Went on to do a PhD on the topic, got to work in some amazing remote communities and Indigenous communities in Cape York, which is at the top of Queensland, Australia. Loved my time up there. Didn't so much love the academic side of things in terms of the competitiveness and lack of community that I was involved in. And instead, I found myself constantly reaching for community on my YouTube channel and trying to make friends and build that, when I probably should have been doing a little bit more of my work at the time. But ultimately, I kind of got to a bit of a breaking point where I was at the lowest I was just at the lowest emotional state of my life, and the 9 to 5 was just physically draining me. And I had this other life I felt on YouTube and creating the videos. So I worked really hard to keep putting videos out and work on that so that I could give up the academic job and instead get a side job as a bush regenerator. So I had a lot of experience working in nature and the environment and rehabilitating mine sites. So I started a job down the south coast of New South Wales, where we moved to from Brisbane, and worked as a bush regenerator while I was building the nature patch and the YouTube, and also then my backyard flower business. So currently I've now finished up doing the bush regeneration jobs, and I'm working full time doing content creation for the nature patch and also running my backyard cut flower farm. So it's kind of two businesses working as one, I suppose. It's the same business, but it's kind of split into two main factors. But yeah, I have always loved gardening, and it's just something that has stuck with me ever since having apartment gardens when I was doing my undergrad, just growing like as many greens and herbs and radishes that I could, to now being able to actually have a lot more of a larger space and be able to create cottage gardens on our property, native garden areas, and also have a productive flower farm. So a lot of those themes will probably come back up in the podcast episodes. I do want to talk about backyard business and how you might be able to grow something in your backyard to turn it into a full-time job eventually, and share my experience of that. But also just talk about gardening and how you can create your dream backyard. And I have so many desires and wants for my garden. If you watch my YouTube videos, you'll know I have the cottage garden and then all other different areas of the garden that they all work in together, in that it's very permaculture based, I suppose. But yeah, I don't really subscribe to one certain type of gardening, other than I want it to be as cost effective, so really low cost, and to also be able to give back to the native wildlife around here, but also to be able to produce my own food and flowers and just have a space for me to go and to relax and to overall improve my mental health. Going into nature and into the garden has always been a big part of my mental health journey, and just dealing with anxiety and a very big failure complex that I do have, in terms of not thinking that I'm good enough a lot of the time. And we can chat more about that later. Don't want to get too much into that now, but it is something that I do struggle with in terms of just really dealing with that imposter syndrome that I can't seem to shake a lot of the time. But when I am out in the garden and I'm physically working with the soil, working with seeds and seedlings, all of that just disappears, and you have a set purpose in terms of, planting a plant or nurturing the soil to be able to grow something. Your mind can really just be lifted from a lot of your problems, to then actually have some time to relax and to calm your nervous system, which I think in this day and age is so important to do. And I just chat to so many people who are craving that, are craving the desire to slow down a little bit, to, calm their nerves, to be able to just have a quiet space. And I really hope this podcast can help you with that, to be that nice, peaceful and quiet space, if you know what I mean. The pun before, but also to encourage you to create your own peaceful space in your garden as well. So I am very inspired by nature as well, so I would love to talk more about wildlife and bringing wildlife into your gardens. And also with my science background, being an environmental scientist, I would love to talk about like soil science and compost building and like water management, all these things about your gardens that I feel like I can chat a little bit more on this podcast and talk a little bit more in depth about, rather than on my videos, which they have a lot of the same information, but it's quite condensed into both an informative but very like entertaining way of presenting information. And yeah, I just wanted to record these episodes here to expand on a little bit of those topics. So that is a little bit about myself and my background. I also, other than gardening, I have a lot of other hobbies. Gardening probably is the main hobby, but I've also since been really interested in getting back into reading. I used to read so many books when I was younger, and I've recently been trying to get back into that, so might do some little book reviews on the podcast as well. I'm trying to get into some books that really have like a garden theme to them, and there's a lot of other like non-fiction books, I suppose, that I could talk about with gardening, but I am trying to get back into fiction books and like fantasy and lots of other different genres of books to really train my brain to stop requiring dopamine from social media. It's a real big problem, and I know I'm not the only one who does the doom scrolling where your brain is literally, the thing about it is your brain is just wanting to find something interesting and new. It's not even really about the content that you're consuming and that you're actually watching the video and maybe then getting something out of it. It's more the act of scrolling and going through all of these videos to find something, and the thrill of seeking and finding content, which I'm trying to train my brain to not do that and actually to settle down a little bit and calm down, maybe do some reading, do some crocheting, embroidery. Those are the things that I'm trying to get into, basically embodying like what I want to be as a grandma in a 28-year-old's body is the goal. So that's what I'm trying to do, as well as obviously run this business and make these videos and podcast videos, which grandmas can do as well. So anyway, I don't know where I'm going, but let's go back onto my notes that I have here. Yes, those are my other hobbies if you're also interested, as well as all of the flower farm business stuff, which we'll chat about in another episode. But for today, I wanted to just chat through a few seeds that I'm starting right now, and I would like to kind of either make this a monthly or a seasonal thing where I chat just about what I'm doing in the garden for that month of the year. A lot of people ask me, what do I grow at the moment? What am I supposed to be doing in the garden? What are you planting? What varieties of things are you planting? How do I do this? How do I do that? All those questions. And I totally get it. I get that the whole gardening thing can be very overwhelming, particularly if you have not grown your own food before. So I want these videos to be a resource for you to be able to go to and listen and just get some ideas of what you might want to work on in your garden that month. And this is not like an exhaustive list or anything. I'm not going to tell you all of the things that you should be doing and planting. I'm more just going to chat about what I've done in the garden, some plants that I'm growing, and just some other ideas of maybe what you might want to grow at this time of the year. So yeah, I might try and do these as like a monthly podcast episode. But also just let me know what you would like to listen to and what kind of information you would like me to discuss, because I do chat about this in my YouTube videos where I kind of share like some seeds and varieties of things that I'm going to grow, but might also just chat about that here in a little bit more detail. And also it's kind of like an opportunity for me to plan what I'm going to do, because a lot of the time I don't have a plan and I need to sit down and have times like this where I go through my seed stash and find what's good to plant right now. So it's early March right now. Technically in like the European calendar, it is classed as autumn. The autumn equinox, when the sun crosses over the equator and the days and the nights are then kind of more at the same length. That doesn't occur until later in March, about the 20th, 21st. I can't remember the exact date. But anyway, we're coming into the cooler months. So things you might start to notice, obviously the mornings are probably going to be a little bit cooler. That's the first thing I am noticing, which will probably change soon because of daylight savings, and it still confuses me, daylight savings. So I'm not going to chat about that, but yes, I think that'll change again in April when the clocks go back again and time changes again. But while I'm waking up at the moment in the morning, it's nice and cool. And this morning in particular, I felt that it actually felt around, I think my app said it was around 15 degrees, but felt a little bit cooler. And it was the first morning that I woke up and I contemplated, do I want an iced coffee or do I want a hot coffee? And throughout all the hot months and the warmer months of the year, I'm always having iced coffee until it hits to winter, and it's only in the cool months that I will like warm coffees. Sometimes not even. I prefer iced coffees, but anyway, I'm going on a tangent. It was cool this morning. The other things I'm noticing in the garden, I'm just starting to see like the tomato plants starting to die back a little bit. They are coming to the end of their life, but they're still producing a lot of tomatoes, which is amazing. And a lot of this is just due to the daylight hours being reduced and being exposed to a little bit more of darkness. And, if you don't have a sunny day as well, there's less sunlight, and that can just encourage more diseases. So a lot of the tomato plants have started just to get some diseases, start looking a little browner and are dying back a little bit. The zucchini plants are getting powdery mildew. It's been a real bad year for powdery mildew. Same as the cucumber vine. It's been a really good year for cucumbers, but I can see the vine is starting to slow down a little bit. And this is the time when you want to start to think about actually sowing some seeds. So rather than waiting for your plants to completely die back and completely be gone, and then you have an empty spot in the ground, it's important to start your cooler weather seeds now so that you can get them established to then be able to plant into the ground. And this is something that I prefer to do. It's kind of more along the lines of succession sowing, even though it's a different plant that you'll be planting in. But I always really like to have plants ready to go so that I don't have a bare piece of land. Other than down the flower farm area, which is kind of a completely different way of growing, where I often will leave the soil to rest with either cardboard or some black plastic over the top. In the cottage garden where I grow most of my food and herbs, I really want to maintain having produce coming out of that area. So as soon as one plant is done, then I want to replace it with another one. So that's what I have started to do the last few weeks. I've been going through my seed stash, and I'm trying to make a point of not buying too many seeds. There were a few exceptions that I'll chat about, but I've got most of the seeds that I need for the garden this year. So as I said, my tomatoes are coming to an end, and probably where I have a lot of my tomatoes planted, I'm going to replace them with some broccoli. Broccoli is one of my favorite things to grow in the cooler months of the year. It can be a little tricky to get going because a lot of times with, the warmer part of autumn, there is still the cabbage moth butterfly. They're little white butterflies that you'll see flying around your garden, and they lay their eggs on brassica plants, which broccoli is a type of brassica. Other brassicas include like kale, cauliflower, kohlrabi, all of your broccolis, even things like radish and rocket. You might see some little eggs that have been laid on there, and then green caterpillars, which can be really devastating to your brassica crops. I know for me personally, around here we have also a lot of bowerbirds. They really like eating brassica leaves throughout the winter and when the seedlings are getting going. So you just want to keep an eye on your small little broccoli and brassica seedlings when you're planting them, either netting them or just putting a little cage over them if you have bird problems, just to keep some of those pests away. Not that they're pests, they're a part of nature, but they're a pest in your garden, if you know what I mean. So I've already planted some purple sprouting broccoli and I'm trying to grow this because apparently the purple varieties of a lot of brassicas do better with the cabbage moth butterfly. I remember when I planted some kale, I think it was red Russian kale, it got way less damaged versus my dwarf blue kale. The caterpillars and the butterfly really seem to like laying eggs on the blue dwarf kale, which is a really fantastic variety if you're after growing some kale. But yeah, they tended to leave the red kale alone a little bit more. And the purple and darker red colors are due to the pigment in the plant called anthocyanins. I never pronounce that correctly, but it's basically just a group of antioxidants which is found in a lot of like red and purple foods and is very healthy for you to be consuming plants that have this deep purple color. But apparently it can also help the plant be protected from like fungal diseases. Apparently, I don't think there's a lot of studies about this, but yeah, I found that the bugs, including the cabbage white moth butterfly, are less attracted to these than they are to the bright green. It's probably also because the caterpillars are bright green and they camouflage into the green of a lot of other broccoli leaves and the kind of traditional green kale than they would to a bright purple cabbage. They will still get a little impacted, but I found that, yep, these varieties do a lot better. So along with the purple sprouting broccoli, I've also planted, or I will be planting, I haven't sowed them just yet, but I'm probably going to do some seed sowing tomorrow. I'm going to grow some red acre cabbage. We grew some really amazing cabbage here, not last year, but the year before. My soil is pretty good for that. We've got clay soil. Brassicas really do like a good amount of clay. They also are heavy feeders as well, so make sure you've got all of your good nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium in your soils. They will definitely benefit from a good amount of nitrogen. But yes, they seem to do well in our clay soils. So I'm going to be growing some of the red acre cabbage. I'm also trying a new variety called Early Jersey Wakefield cabbage and some greens. I'm growing Georgia Southern collards. I've grown these before. They're a great addition to a cottage garden because they look absolutely beautiful and stunning, and they grow quite tall as well in terms of a brassica. It's kind of like a small tree that you're growing, but it's edible and it looks really beautiful. So yeah, I'm keen for that. Another thing that I have planted recently, and they've actually all sprouted now, is my carrots. So I'm growing 2 different varieties. I think one of them, I never know how to pronounce it, Nante carrots, which are your traditional orange carrots. They are kind of a medium size. And then I'm growing some cosmic purple carrots and they have since sprouted. Carrots do take quite a few days to germinate. I think mine took about 6 days or so. And it's really crucial to make sure that the soil is consistently moist when you're growing carrots to have really good germination. So the carrots I actually planted in like a veggie felt planter, and I have it right next to my little desk office space, right next to a window next to the cottage garden. So I can actually just see what the soil looks like from my desk, because I need to monitor it and make sure that the soil is kept nice and moist, or else the carrot seeds won't actually germinate. They might start to germinate, and then if they don't have that consistent moisture, they might just not continue to germinate, and you might not see any germination at all if you have moisture problems with your soil. Another thing that I am probably going to start soon is some beetroot. What are the varieties that I've grown? I think I usually just grow Detroit, which is one of my favorites because it's a nice large beetroot. There's lots of other different types of beetroot. Golden beetroot I also really love, and it's just fun to grow because you don't see it a lot of the time, but it tastes exactly the same, sometimes a little bit more sweeter. Beetroot is something that you'll want to start from, start directly in the ground. You can start them in trays and transplant them out, but if you can, I would just always plant any kind of root vegetable directly into the ground. Particularly carrots, I would avoid never buying seedlings of carrots. Same with beetroot, because you just don't know when they actually sowed the seeds. Carrots as well, really big no-no. Try not to buy them from a punnet, because they're so fiddly and their roots are so fine and fragile that they can be really damaged when you transplant them. Beetroot roots are a little bit more robust, but I would still just recommend any root vegetable, plant them and sow the seeds directly into the ground. If you're in more of a warmer climate, I'm more in a temperate climate, but for like the subtropics and even like more tropical areas of Australia, you can start your artichokes. Granted that you don't get any like harsh frosts or anything like that. I haven't grown artichokes yet, but it's something that I would definitely like to try. And I do have seeds for them, but I haven't planted them. I think I'll leave them for spring. And another big category of what I am growing and sowing right now is all of my alliums. So these are like onions, spring onions, chives, shallots, all of that group of plants. And these are one of my favorites to grow. Homegrown onions and shallots, like bunching onions, they taste so good. So I love to grow them. And I have since started some onions. I actually started a whole tray of onions that I shared in a video. And then what happened was I dropped the entire tray the afternoon of filming. The tray just fell out of my hands when I was moving it from one spot to another. So I lost the entire tray. I had a bit of a moment when I was so tired that day, and you know when just those things just happen and then that just tips you over the edge a little bit. So I had to come inside and compose myself, have an ice cream, and then go back out because it was also such a hot day as well. I've since started another tray, and I'm growing the Gladylin brown onions as well as long Tropea red, and I do have one other variety of white onions that I can't remember what it's called. But yeah, those are the onions that I'm growing, as well as Carrington leeks. They've all come up now, and the American flag leeks haven't, but I think the seeds were just a little bit too old, or I did something wrong with them. I don't know. What else am I growing? In terms of flowers, I'm going to do a whole episode on cool flowers and what cool flowers actually are and what I'm growing and how I'm growing them. So I'm not going to chat about flowers in this episode. If you want to know that information like right now, you can head over to my YouTube channel where I have a few videos of what I sowed last year. It's going to be pretty similar this year. And lots of information over there about flowers. What else? Let's do a quick fire of things you can plant right now. Didn't chat about this, but you can plant all of your like spinach and lettuce and mustard greens, all of those beautiful greens that like cool weather, like corn salad, endive, mizuna, rocket, tatsoi, bok choy, pak choy. I just love some of those Asian vegetables. Very excited to plant some of those. You can also plant, and I've planted some silver beet. I'm growing the ruby red silver beet this year. What else have we got? Swede, turnip, a lot of other of your Asian vegetables, lots of herbs, like you can still plant dill, parsley, chives, as I mentioned. I've still got, I just planted some basil the other day, which doesn't really mind the cooler weather. It actually, it doesn't do well in the dead of winter, but I find it doesn't like the heat of summer because it tends to go to seed really quickly. Other plants, you can also plant like your celery, celeriac, and if you're in more of a tropical climate, you can still plant things like cucumber, tomatoes, eggplant, pumpkins, radishes, rock melon, a lot of those warmer loving plants, even like capsicums. If you are in the northern area of Australia and you don't really have a cool winter. I actually used to live up near the Whitsundays, and winter was the time to garden. It was the time when you could actually grow things because it was just way too hot and humid in summer, that a lot of the vegetables, unless you were growing like a lot of Asian vegetables which can handle the heat, and like tropical fruit trees and things like that. Things like broccoli and lettuce and peas, snow peas and peas are another thing we can plant right now. Get excited for those. But yeah, it was just too hard. It was too hard in the warmer months. So yeah, now is your time to kind of get creative and get growing if you're in the tropics and subtropics. Granted, you don't have areas that get frost or like really cold spots in your property. So I think that's about it. That covers a lot of the veggies that you can grow right now. I've definitely missed out a few. I definitely have, but I can't think of any more off the top of my head. So those were some of the ones that I'm going to be growing. Not all of that list, but quite a few of those I want to try and grow this year. I am going to wait a little bit longer for potatoes though, probably more into like April. I might start some potatoes. They don't usually come out for sale for another month or so. So yeah, I'm going to wait for potatoes and grow them more in winter. But I suppose this really just depends on your climate. And I mean, if you're getting really hard freezes or snow, you won't be growing your potatoes over winter. But for where we are quite close to the coast. And yeah, it's a very temperate, very much like a Mediterranean climate here. We get quite mild winters, but it is still cool enough to be able to grow a lot of those things like broccoli and cabbages and things like that really need the cold weather. Not quite cold enough for tulips, and even some garlic varieties don't do amazing here. I'll chat more about garlic in another episode, and yeah, I don't think I'm actually going to grow garlic this year, but around April is probably a good time to start getting your garlic in the ground if you're also in like a temperate climate, same as me. Like I say temperate, I mean kind of like similar to a Sydney climate is probably what we have where we are on the south coast of New South Wales. Again, all of this will depend on where you live and knowing your microclimate and your soil type, where frost might hit on your property in terms of what things you might actually be able to start and sow and grow right now. So for all of my podcast episodes, just keep that in mind to do your own research, and I will try and cover a lot of different climates and zones as I can. But obviously Australia is a very big place and I can't chat about all different climates, but I will focus more around the temperate and subtropic climates of what I'm used to. I think that is pretty much it for this first episode. It was a lot. It was a lot of chatting, and I hope it wasn't too up and down in terms of the topics that I was chatting about. To be honest, I had a plan for this episode and I've kind of gone over a little bit of the plan and my points on my laptop, but I've kind of just done my own thing, I suppose, and I hope it has come together okay. And I hope you have enjoyed this episode, whether you have done some gardening while listening to it, or you are on your way home from work or to work, or wherever you might be. I just really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I would love to hear any feedback that you have or any topics that you'd like me to discuss on any future episodes. Currently, this episode, I'm just recording the audio. I'm not filming myself recording this episode. I just needed some time and space to get back into the podcast brain and scene. So I just wanted to focus on doing the audio, but let me know if you would actually like me to film myself. The plan is to actually put these videos up on a YouTube channel and have the audio up on there, because I know some people like to listen on YouTube, others like to listen on Spotify and all of the other podcast apps. So yeah, I just want to put it out there as best as I can and try and make everyone as happy as I can, but I also need to keep my mental health in check, and I just felt more comfortable filming just the audio or recording the audio of this episode. But if you would like to actually see my face and me filming myself, then I can organize that as well. And hopefully I'll be able to do that for any guests that I do have on the podcast, which will eventually come as the months progress and I get used to this solo podcasting thing. But yes, thank you so much for being here. Let me know what you thought of the episode, and I am very excited to come back next week with another episode. I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are in the world, and until my next one, happy gardening, everyone. Bye.